ACEC Research Institute's Board of Directors. Welcome to our first roundtable in the series, The Future of Engineering. A big thank you to our donors who have made this session possible. We have a great group of thought leaders, as you can see here today, that will share their insights and expertise with us on the impact of technology on engineering. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce two of my colleagues from the ACEC Research Institute, Joe Bates, who will serve as our moderator today, and Kevin McMahon, who will be monitoring the chat box and fielding your questions during the session. Joe, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Daphne, and thank you everybody for joining today's roundtable. Before we get started with our questions, I'd like to introduce each of our panelists for the webinar today. First, we have Jose Luis Blanco. He's a partner at McKinsey and Company. Jose leads McKinsey's engineering, construction, building materials, and construction technology work in North America, and is a leader of its real estate practice. He brings deep expertise in optimizing performance and unlocking value through embedding digital capabilities and deploying and scaling up new technologies. We also have Mike Haley, Vice President of Research at Autodesk. Mike leads a team of researchers, engineers, and specialists to explore the future of how people design and make things. A primary focus of his team is automation and leveraging technologies and disciplines that include machine learning, robotics, human-computer interaction, geometry, and visualization. Next, we have Chris Luebkeman. He's the Director of Strategic Foresight at the Office of the President with ETH Zurich. Chris has a multidisciplinary education, including geology, civil engineering, structural engineering, entrepreneurship, and a doctorate in architecture. And he is deeply passionate about curating constructive dialogue. Insatiably curious, he relishes the opportunity to discover the opportunities which will be created by change, and perhaps most importantly, to evolve positive solutions to the profound challenges we face today. And last but not least, we have Heather Wishart-Smith. She's SVP of Technology and Innovation at Jacobs. Heather is a registered professional engineer and certified project management professional with proven experience managing large design programs and developing, managing, and turning around troubled offices in the architectural engineering professional services market. And also Heather is a fellow of SAME, and she is currently president-elect for the 2020-2021 centennial year. Thank you, all of our panelists, for joining us today. I'd first like to start out with a question, fairly broad one for each of you to start out with. And I'm going to ask Mike to start us with this. Based on your individual perspectives as you look at the engineering industry, what are the one or two biggest impacts that technology will have on the industry in the future, say in the next 5 to 7 years, for instance? Will things be going faster? Will we be doing things in a different place? What's going to happen, Mike?
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, it is a broad question. There's two main things that come to mind for me. So the first one relates to systems. And, I think as we all know, engineering anything in the world today, and especially buildings, is all about resolving the various forces that are acting between the systems. And systems might be the relationship between the architecture of the building, the structure of the building, the MEP systems. It could be the relationship between the materials and the methods of production of the building and the sustainability of the environment. It could be the relationship between the people that are ultimately going to be in the building. And today, in most practices, we don't have a way of resolving all of those tensions all the time because systems are inherently very complex and they're always changing. So the industries rely on rules of thumb, established practices, standards, these kinds of things. And I can see that changing in the future. We're beginning to have the ability to automate the understanding of systems and be able to bring those insights and that guidance to engineers and designers in that process. So that's my one aspect. That then leads to the second one, Joe, which is that with all of this automation and your question about, are we going to need more engineers? Are we going to need less engineers? What's the nature of the job market? I actually believe we're going to need more. And the reason I believe we're going to need more is I actually think we're opening up the world to greater possibilities right now with these tools. And that is going to lead to my second point, which relates to knowledge and education. And I think as we build automation systems that understand and learn the patterns, we don't just use that knowledge to automate and make the machine do things, but we can use that knowledge to upskill people. We can train people more easily in using tools and using techniques. We can raise the sea level for lots of people at the same time with technology. So I see that as a sort of a commensurate trend that we're going to see in the coming years.
Great. Let's go over to Chris. Chris, what do you think?
So I totally agree with everything Mike just said, and I want to amplify a couple points. I think there's three things. We're going to see expansion, acceleration, and consolidation. As Mike said, an expansion of what we can do, an expansion of tool sets, an expansion of know-how, an expansion of what we're going to be asked to do. I think there's the acceleration. There's going to be, we're suffering from this already. We like to complain about not enough time to even think anymore. We just have to do. And frankly, that's not going to stop. And so therefore these tools are going to help us, I hope. And these techniques in our teaming will help us deal with that acceleration. And the last is consolidation. I think we've seen over the past 10, 20 years, an industry-wide consolidation, especially in the built environment. And I believe, frankly, that will continue. But I also believe, we go back to the first one, it's going to lead to an expansion. Because as we have the consolidation, and so this core, all of a sudden there's going to be the realization we need these new typologies of specialists who can really focus on, for example, getting our third world infrastructure back up to what it needs to be in order to regain our a position of pride. And the other part of this is the consolidation of knowledge. I really think that we're going to be able to acquire, and I think it's not consolidation by what's there, but how we get it. Right? So we're going to be able to, in a much easier way, consolidate know-how, consolidate knowledge in a much more rapid way. So those are my three words.
Great. Jose, what about you?
I like how Chris framed it in three specific, sentences or things. Let me try to do the same. I think that for me, the three things that I believe, what I would love to see going forward, given what we see in technology, is more transparency first. Second, being more outcome driven. And the third one is actually much more collaborative environment. Let me try to just give you 15 seconds from each one. The transparency, I think it's clear, but I think right now we're capturing data. Not only we're capturing data, we're storing data in a much smarter way that we're going to be able to actually analyze that data and provide transparency to some of the traditional issues we always have in the construction industry, engineering construction industry. Okay, who made that change? What happened? What was the implication? So I think that that's going to be a huge unlock for us. And we're looking at a lot of noise that is always around our industry and to move forward. The second one, outcome driven, is also tied to the first one. I think if we have more data and we have more transparency, I think we're going to be able to actually, our designs are going to be much more outcome driven. It's going to be able to provide better service to our owners. I mean, I'm sure Mike and his team are working on generative design like crazy these days. And that for me is critical because you're going to be able to fully actually capture what the client needs and actually tell them, like, here are the choices for you, depending on the outcomes you're trying to achieve. And the third one, which is the collaborative point, I think it's much more than just breaking silos because we're going to have much more transparency. It's like, for me, going back to Chris' point about knowledge, is really unleashing like the potential talent, the potential of like a group of engineers working together, right? Removing all the constraints that we need to do right now, being time, silos and many other things. So these three things, transparency, outcome driven, and collaborations, are the things that I expect and hope to see in the future.
Heather, why don't you round us out here with your thoughts on this subject?
Sure. So I think that my thoughts on this are really, quite frankly, complementary to what the gentlemen have mentioned. The first really that I would focus on is the interconnectivity of systems. So Mike did mention systems, but that interconnectivity and disciplines, and then also the technical workforce. With regard to the interconnectivity of systems, you look at the interconnectivity of society. We're coming out of a pandemic, the future of cities. the urbanization, everything is going to need to rely on technology to really meet that exponential growth and the exponential growth of megacities. So as was mentioned earlier, this will provide more opportunities for engineers to get involved, to leverage that kind of technology. And, you know, Jose mentioned silos. With that, I mean, I really think that those who are most successful in the technology-enabled world will be those who are able to break down those silos and cut across disciplines. So much of what we do in innovation is, rather than just, say, creating something in one discipline and then kind of throwing it over the transom to the next discipline and the next discipline, cutting across and co-creating across disciplines in order to increase that speed to market. But then the workforce is that second aspect. You know, of course, there's so many statistics out there about the US in particular not graduating enough STEM graduates. And of course, it's about more than just graduating them. We need to retain them once they come into the workforce in order to remain competitive. But we also need to recognize the value of the trades, particularly as the trades become increasingly complex as we bring IoT into operations and maintenance and all of that. So I think sometimes it's tempting to view technology as kind of a way out of not graduating enough STEM graduates, but it's really going to cause the need for even more of those graduates. They need to, you know, they need to have the skill set to design, to program, to operate, to maintain all the technologies that we think will help, you know, get us out of the brain drain, if you will. But that workforce, it needs to be nimble, adaptable, needs to be committed to lifelong learning. And finally, I think it's critically important that that workforce be inclusive and diverse. It's not just the right thing to do. It's been proven by study after study that inclusive and diverse companies and organizations perform better. It allows us as an industry to just really cast the widest net, to draw the widest possible pool of candidates, to get as many STEM professionals as we can. And it's really once you get that critical mass of diversity, that's when you can get the most benefit from diversity of thought.
So Heather, I think you provided a great segue into the next section of questions here that I wanted to ask about. And that's about the increasing speed of design and how that impacts projects and delivery. And in particular, are there generational issues that we need to consider here? Are younger people that are graduating more adept with the technology that is out there? Or, you know, what are your thoughts on this?
So because the people who are graduating today are digital natives, I think it's, you know, very often tempting to fall into that unconscious bias that people who have more time in their career might not be as willing or able to change. But I have found and worked with so many people who are at the latter end of their career who really do fully embrace that technology and innovation. So I mentioned earlier being nimble, being adaptable, having that commitment to lifelong learning. It's really about that mindset. And I think it's also important to be open to taking on, say, a reverse mentor. Yes, we absolutely need to be learning from younger people. We need to provide better pathways to promotion and success. But we shouldn't in any way be writing off, due to our unconscious bias, any kind of, you know, whole groups of people.
Right.
I'd also add that, you know, not all technology is innovation. Not all innovation involves technology. Some of the best innovations we have are those that have nothing to do with technology. It's really, innovation in my mind is about how you approach problem solving, constantly asking what is the problem that we're trying to solve. So automation, of course, you know, we all know it should be harnessed to reduce repetitive tasks and oftentimes also more higher risk operations to get people out of harm's way. We should be using it for rapid optioneering. We all know about, you know, generating just infinite possibilities, filtering them down to make sure that we're presenting to our clients what's best for them. Gone are the days where we show up at the charrette with just, you know, 3 possibilities. So we have a lot more to offer. It's all about that design attitude approach rather than the decision attitude approach, because, you know, of course, decision attitude is assuming that all the, you know, the good options are out there. It's just a matter of deciding which one is best. But as we move into more automation, I really think it's important to take that design attitude approach to come up with the best alternatives. And then after that, the decision will be much easier.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll add into that a little bit what Heather said. You know, what we've found with the newer generations, the digital natives, as you put it, Heather, is that there's a different expectation about the time to productivity. The traditional tools, certainly that we've been building, were things that required a long time to become proficient at. You had to study them, you had to learn them, you had to learn the features, there was a period of learning that was required. And there's a level of expectation now about digital natives that they can pick up a tool and be productive immediately. So this relationship between learning and being productive, I think, is going to change. We're no longer going to have a world where you learn first and after a distinct period of time you become productive. The two are going to be much more intertwined.
Yeah, I think there's also...
Joe, I've got a question from the audience I could ask you. One of the audience members wants to know, in the future, because of the varied nature and multidisciplinary skills that are going to be needed that all the panelists have mentioned, will graduates be coming out of school with more a varied skill set, majors in civil, but perhaps minors in mechanical and electrical, for instance?
Yeah, so I'll address that. I would even, great question, and I would even take it one step further, not just minors in mechanical and electrical, but in programming, in robotics, in all kinds of different disciplines that might not have been considered as related, say, to civil engineering as in the past. But the challenge for us in the industry is to make use of them. I think the risk is really there where you get these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed new graduates, and they come in and we're really attracted to them because they have the programming skills, they have the robotics background, they've done all kinds of 3D printing, and then we sit them behind a computer and tell them to design things the same way that we've been doing it for decades. And we run the risk of burning them out, of just really disenfranchising them. So we can't just be attracted to them. We need to recognize that we need to continue to foster that and cycle them through different opportunities and then listen to them when they come up with a way to challenge the status quo.
I think what Heather just said is super important. And I think that there's, if I may add one another point, is I think there's a very thin balance between, and technology needs to help us with that, between actually ensuring that we maintain like the know-how that has been built by the, I would call the older generation, so to speak. I mean, we know that our between 30 and 40% of the workforce is going to retire over the next 10 to 15 years. So I think technology needs to allow us to capture that kind of know-how, make it institutional, and at the same time, without the same time, and now we're allowing or empowering the new generation to do new things and to innovate, right? So for me, that's a little bit of a little bit of balance that we need to do. How do we maintain that know-how, and how do we, was pointing out, the new generation to do things differently, not the same way I've been done before? That for me is where you actually make magic happen.
So, excuse me, I'd like to build on that as well. Yes, and first to the graduates, and then to what Jose was just saying. I think the question, Kevin, was a little bit, in my mind, too limited, saying, going to major in civil and mechanical. I would much rather say, well, how about civil and philosophy, or civil and biomedical, or bio, or some earth sciences, or something. Actually, I think what we're hoping to see is actually a mix of the hard, the decision sciences with the natural sciences, because the challenges which we require, I think, as a society, are not just those who are trained how to make a decision, but as Heather was saying, the profound impact of a systems understanding, and the need for us to understand more and more about how the elements within the systems sometimes need to be sub-optimized so that the system is optimized. And I think this is one thing. And the second point, to build on what Jose was saying, is I totally agree with that. And we have to figure out how to make real lifelong learning, not just continuing education credits, which you go to some lunchtime lecture, which we all do, and get a stamp and say, oh boy, that was good, thank you very much. But actually to real meaningful lifelong learning, and how, and I frankly, I don't know exactly what that means at this point, but I do know we're all recognizing that due to the rate of change, both professional, informational knowledge, that we need to find better ways to foster, to empower and encourage real lifelong learning and lifelong curiosity to learn.
Exactly.
And I think that those are the two aspects there, which are not hand in hand, but and nor self-evident, but very, very critical for us.
Joe, we have one very interesting question, then I'll let you ask the next question to the panelists. The question is, with the super evolvement of technology, do the panelists see that where most of the work is still procured locally and performed locally, do they see a future where the local office where the client is maybe just a small nub for collaboration, and then the overwhelming bulk of the work is done around the globe or outside that core local office? Do they see that future happening in the next 5 to 7 years?
I'll say we're beginning to see that happening already. I think it's a growing trend. You know, technology is an enabler of it, so is the economy, so is society, right? All at the same time. We're seeing the shift of cloud adoption, people storing their data in centralized locations. They can access it from everywhere. The days of having it on the server inside your company and only being able to use it there are long gone for a lot of companies. I think the gig economy, the notion of being able to hold down multiple contract jobs at the same time, switch between things, manage your workload, manage your life, is a reality for a larger and larger number of people year over year. And then I just think that the borders are breaking down in terms of how we think about the world. And I think just because you live in another side of the world, you can think about problems elsewhere in the world quite easily. You have access to that information.
And I'll add to that, we've actually been doing this for years. It started out, I look back in my career when I was, managing programs, it started to become, of course, necessary when you needed to bring in a specialist who you wouldn't expect to have in the local office. But it really has evolved to the point where it's just a normal part of how we do things these days. And I think it will just continue to evolve. Now, that's a little bit different. I come from a very large firm. And the smaller firms, probably it's not as necessary, but it's absolutely being done. And in addition to the technology and adoption of cloud, as Mike said, also virtual and augmented reality has helped to facilitate that as well. And it also means less travel for some of our staff. So that's better from a work-life balance perspective.
To me, I agree with both of those again, strange. But to me, it's all about access. At the end of the day, you used to not have access to first-class knowledge unless you were in a center.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we right now are in 2 different continents, 7 different time zones, and yet we're all accessing each other at this moment, and the other almost 300 people. And so it's access. And so it's access to knowledge, but it's also access to the marketplace. So I've been, for the past 5-10 years, really encouraging the integration of small local offices, because at the end of the day, we know with the global move towards segregation, so national segregation and regional segregation, this is going to continue. And so the local offices are going to become key to be networked and to create a new kind of network, which is trans-regional, as globalization screeches to a halt. I think this is going to be a new reality, which we have to really look at. How can we make sure that the small local office can really provide the most excellent world-class delivery? And I think that at the same time, we will still be, the big firms will still work globally, and the Jacobs, the Arabs, these, they'll be able to flip work around the world, and they'll continue doing that.
Great. So I want to move on to the next section, and I'm going to have Jose, I'd like to direct you and start out with you on this one. There's a lot of buzzwords today in technology, such as digital twins, data analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. I'd like to talk about, first of all, what do the terms actually mean? And secondly, how will they actually affect the industry in the future? So maybe, Jose, if you want to start out with one of these areas and kick us off.
Yeah, so a couple of reactions here. I think that there's definitely a lot of buzzwords going on. And I think that I would like to separate. The reason for that is because I think people sometimes actually confuse, technologies that are available or venture capitalist funding, right? Or the money is flowing to actually develop or investigate versus technologies that are really being adopted or as having mass adoption. So I will make that distinction in the beginning of it, right? So it's just speaking on 2 or 3 of what you said, is like, really, if I think about technologies, for instance, that are already impacting the way we work, obviously there's analytics that actually are being applied, or advanced analytics are being applied in the field for early flags for projects in terms of like, how do you explain, or the main factors that explain what a project can turn profitable, not profitable. So you can do a reduction analysis to actually do that, and even just forecast that. You can definitely do it, analysis of bidding factors, or even you can apply other like generative design, for instance, right, which is starting to be widely used, right? So there's things that are already happening, right? When you think about some of the things that may happen in the future, or may starting to happen but not fully implemented, that's when you start entering like the world of like a potential digital twin in construction, or potential like artificial intelligence, the way we actually fully explain. I don't think we're doing artificial intelligence in construction per se right now. I think we're starting to do machine learning, and actually Mike might actually disagree with that or not, but actually that's a little bit like how we see. So I think that the big important thing for me is like all these technologies we're exploring, and we should be talking about all of them, right? And venture capital is funding a significant amount of them, and we're seeing a lot of them. The ones that are actually being adopted, I wouldn't say at scale, but started to be adopted as a sizable pattern, actually are much limited. I mean, limited to analytics, limited to obviously maybe generative design, some machine learning applications in project planning, and a bunch of other. We're in a journey of action, right? Some of that is implemented, and I just want to hone on what you say, digital twin. It's like for very specific kind of use cases or very specific like areas, we still like are a little bit like far away from a fully functioning digital twin, the way we understand it in aeronautics, or the way we understand it, the industrial processes. Anyway, that's my perspective.
Yeah, I think Jose makes a great point about, I think of it as the hype cycle, right? And the reality is all technology goes through a hype cycle, and terms like artificial intelligence, machine learning are hyped terms. Now, we deeply believe in artificial intelligence and machine learning and digital twins, but they have to be ready, to Jose's point. The things I would add is, I think the things that are real today, like you said, are analytics, computational methods. You mentioned it, Heather, as well, the ability to explore alternatives. I think that's becoming a fairly robust capability today. When we start coming back to that systems aspect of things that we were talking about earlier, that's where it starts becoming complicated. And I think this is a big role where machine learning can actually play. If we are to build, digital twins have also been around for actually quite a long time. And as you said, Jose, in other industries too. But the difference is the future digital twins have to understand the system. If they don't understand the systems, they're not correctly reflecting the situation, and you're not going to be able to optimize your solutions correctly. The only way I believe you're going to be able to make correctly representative digital twins in the future is through sampling the world, is through measuring the data, learning from that data, generalizing those patterns, and then placing them within that digital twin. And then you leverage that digital twin to optimize your designs and look for alternatives. But that's a path. That's a path we're on. We're not there yet today.
I think one of the interesting things with all of those is, as you said there, Joe, there are buzzwords and there are many different interpretations. We can look at them with starry eyes and say, I can't wait to do a digital twin, and others get terrified of even thinking of the matrix coming down upon us. But as you've asked, I think it's, and as we're talking, it's really critical that every firm makes the effort to learn about them, both the potential, as is implied by the technology tool makers, but also from those like Jose or Heather or my other colleagues, about what we're seeing as little small implementations that are showing success. So some of the data analytics for mobility and how it's able to really begin through the digital twinning of mobile networks and train systems of our airline systems, actually to say, okay, well, maybe that works there. Maybe I could work on or propose this for this project and we could try something, you know. And I think so for me, the key with the buzzword is that our firms are prototyping a little bit, and they're having a person or two who they give a freedom, one degree of freedom to try this, so that when the client, the project, the tools are all right, that we're ready, that it doesn't take yet another 3 years of ramping up to figure out what the heck it is. And I think that's my 2 cents on that one.
Yeah, Joe, I can give a couple of very specific applications if you're interested.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So starting with digital twins on water treatment and industrial water plants. So we've got a tool called Replica that allows us to optimize those systems to prevent overflows in the event of emergency response, do a lot of scenario and what if training. And it also allows us to optimize the design and operations and maintenance. Another example for data analytics is for NASA at their Langley site in Virginia. We have about 120,000 sensors that are all around that campus that measure things like vibration, temperature, humidity, and we use predictive analytics and machine learning to be able to anticipate when something might break, which then leads to benefits like improved safety. You don't have to send somebody out to just regularly change a fan belt or whatnot. Improved reliability, that is a huge aspect of it. A site like NASA, they really do need to keep their site going and not have these unexpected outages. Also, financial benefits, money that's saved, and energy efficiency. And that we didn't start with 120. We started with, I think it was a few thousand or something like that, but it's been going on for about 4 years. And it just goes to show that there are a lot of opportunities in the built environment to be able to harness these technologies. I think we probably, as far as specific discussion about artificial intelligence, but when you marry that with automated design, we've been able to automate the design of, replicate some very repetitive sorts of components, say of rail or other things that are used quite frequently. But then bringing that and taking the learning, again, starting small. So I mentioned starting smaller with Langley, starting smaller with some other things, learn from that, and then be able to use it to scale even larger.
Joe, we have a pretty interesting question following up with what the panel just talked about from the audience. And it's with the ongoing industry evolution of technology, as all 4 of the panelists have described, and the new graduate backgrounds that are not necessarily all the engineering traditionally related, vertical integration of team, perhaps some of those team members being around the world. What impact does the panel see relative to professional engineering licensure requirements, also coupled with the political issue today of making sure that America stays strong in engineering and doesn't outsource all the talent like the manufacturing issue that we're well aware of?
Good question.
Anybody want to bite that one?
So I'm perhaps not the right person to answer this one. And I put that up front because I'm no longer licensed, so I really probably don't have the right to answer that question. I think what's critical is to look at what the responsibilities are and who carries the responsibility. Because to me, a professional engineer in Switzerland, you don't need to have us, go through another licensing exam, because the education is supposed to prepare you for that. But at the end of the day, it's who carries the responsibility and what do you want to trust? Do you want to trust a degree, or do you want to trust actually that someone has proven their capability to make the right decisions so I think it's that trust, and I hope I've given Heather enough time so she can answer that question. How did I do?
True friend, Chris. Thank you.
There you go. Sure.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. I am still licensed. But I think yes, it is trust. I think it's important to recognize, despite the fact that there are many forces out there in various states trying to diminish the value of the license, and great organizations like ACEC, like NSPE, have been working hard to show that value. So despite those forces of trying to diminish the value of it, at the end of the day, I think we need to remember that technology is a tool. So yep. The tools have evolved. It used to be that professional engineers just worked at the drafting table. Then we shifted to computer-aided design, and then we've evolved. We've got, all kinds of different tools, but the technology is just a tool. We still need to, as Chris said, trust the people who are applying the tool, and that's where the professional engineering licensure comes in.
Good job, Heather. Thank you.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question that we have here. Okay. We could probably have a roundtable on each one of these questions. So
yes, you could.
this next one I'd like to direct at Heather and Chris as well, actually. And you all have talked a little bit about this already, so maybe dive a bit more into this, but how will the technology affect the culture and the collaboration environment of engineering firms? We talked a little bit about and there was a question about will it, we work different places around the world, but in terms of the culture, how is that going to be impacted by technology?
Chris, would you like to start, or should I start and give you some time to think?
Why don't you go? Either way, you go ahead. You're on the edge of your seat and ready, so go for it.
Okay. So we've already talked about that. I think there's going to be actually several of us have said that we think that there will be a greater focus on cross-disciplinary work. Innovation pretty much demands it. We can't just complete our work in silos. We need to have these multidiscipline teams. And these multidiscipline teams can't just be the disciplines. They need to include the business model, so the HR piece, the finance, and all the rest. That should be part of the development of new solutions. I think a key way of doing this is, at least in my role, is by embracing innovation within the workforce that we have, and that's by promoting collaboration. So we need to teach people across the business to be able to collaborate, to be able to network, so that when that real work does happen, they have that muscle memory of the collaboration, of the innovation. And I mean, in our industry, it's so difficult because we're built on a billable hours culture. It's been this way, for eternity. And there's also a performance unit kind of mentality to the engineering industry where, it doesn't matter how your company is structured, whether you're structured by geography or by discipline or by market, there's still silos. And so we need to find ways to promote and sustain the breaking down of these silos. Many firms are structured to promote and sustain them, but we need to find ways to break them down. They're hard to break down. But I really do think that the firms that endure and those that will be successful are the ones that are successful in doing that, on breaking down those silos.
So I agree with that fully, Heather. And I want to bring up two more aspects. One is co-opetition. We are going to be in an increasingly cooperative and competitive environment. And I think many firms already, and many of us already understand how you can compete and still be friends. And this is one of the things I always enjoyed when I got to travel, go down to Australia and watch sort of an Australian rugby game or rugby, and people would literally, like, without pads, try to beat the blank out of each other. But nobody really did anything where they couldn't go have a beer afterwards. And they would respect each other from, the grit and their cleverness and how they played the game. But you never played dirty, because if you played dirty, you couldn't have that beer. And this is something which I would like to hope that we can also aspire to. Not necessarily Australian rules rugby. It's a crazy game. All due respect, Mike, it's crazy. But this idea that just because we're competitors does not mean we can't always be good friends. And I truly believe we need to work more on the second part. I think we're very good at the first part. So, and I think, so culture is actually a manifestation of both the written and unwritten rules and how one treats each other. And it's the written and the unwritten rules. And part of your question there, Joe, is about culture change. So part of the question that has to be, as we look at ourselves and our firms, what is our culture? And do we actually understand what the written and unwritten rules are of our firm? And if you haven't asked yourself that, and not just what you think as a principle, what the culture is, and you say, well, our culture is openness, and you walk into the office, and as soon as you walk in, everybody puts their head down and they're afraid of you. But you can say it's open, but the reality might be a very different thing. So to actually have a real conversation about the culture that we need in order to be successful in the new economy, in the digital transformation. And
so one thing,
one more thing, Jose, and it's all you. So for me, the most important thing that we could say with this is, and I support Heather, it's not just a technology, but it's actually having a real conversation about our firm's culture and what we want it to be / need it to be. No.
Yeah,
all
so
you, Jose.
Just 10 seconds on this. I think that there's a very clear link between performance and health, right? And health, critical part of that is culture. Mm-hmm. And I think that over the past 3 months with COVID, I think we shift towards a working remote environment, and we all been surprised how fast we've been able to adapt to that, right? Mm-hmm. But I think that some of the challenges of the issues with culture are going to start to appear in the coming months. And it's my belief that you can potentially sustain an existing strong culture remotely. I don't think you can build a culture remotely, or you can rebuild a broken culture remotely. So that's something that firms will need to, when we're hearing about, okay, working from home, I'm going to put all my, half of my staff working from home and things like that. I think the implications on cultural implications of that are yet to be seen, and we just need to pay attention to that going forward.
But I think it's a very good point, Jose.
I think of this topic that is with lifelong learning that a lot of the panelists have mentioned, and the ability for more experienced engineers to learn new tools and skills. Maybe it's more for Mike's first answer. Are the tools keeping pace with the expectation and learning curve of designers to shorten or eliminate the learning curve to use these tools?
No, I wouldn't say they are. I think it's a difficult problem because I don't think it's well understood today. I mean, we still live in a world with traditional educational cycles, traditional university, college, whatever it may be, get your certification, do that. Those are the cycles we live in. So those are the models we have today. There isn't many models that have this sort of rapid learning world that I referred to for. I mean, some of the only models today are actually newer technology applications, things you might get on an iPad that people are learning super fast. And there's ideas, there's hints, I think, all over the place as to what these are. I would hesitate to think of a single really good example that exists in the world of technology today. I can tell you in our research group, this is a very large part of our research objective, and it's precisely for this reason, is that we don't actually know the right ways to do this. We are doing experiments in our software. We're introducing features that help people understand how they're learning the software, how they compare to others who are learning it, what are their patterns of progression through the software. And as we do this, we are gradually introducing more tools, but we're also learning at the same time. So I'm not quite sure what that looks like yet, but we don't have an option. That's the point, though. We have to do this. We have to make this the nature. Tools cannot just be about taking what you do today and automating it away. Tools have to be about making you more effective and making the combination of human and machine better at the end of the day.
No, I think that's great. The other thing I think so fascinating with Kevin with that question is micro-learning.
Yes.
And I have two 20-something-year-olds. One's graduated, one's just about to. And, they do micro-learning. If they need to learn how to do something, they take and look on YouTube and they find a little burst on how to do it. And then all of a sudden, they know how to do it. And it's hard for me of a different generation to think that way. I'd rather call up Mike and have Mike explain it to me and say, hey, you know, and talk to him. And my son, George, would just rather just look at YouTube, look it up. And he actually doesn't care what language it's in. Because if it's a tool, he can just watch the strokes, and sometimes he'll look at something in different languages because it's just interesting to see how someone designs something slightly differently. And it just kind of blows my mind, you know.
So I just want to keep us moving here. I apologize for cutting off these great conversations. This one's just for Mike, and then we're gonna move to the last questions here. But Mike, how are people going to pay for this? You know, are certain firms going to have an advantage, the big firms, because they can afford to pay for the technology and the education and this taking the non-billable hours and to learn it? What's going to happen there? And how will the small firms catch up?
Right. So, I mean, you know, we're seeing a lot of new business models around how people pay for software, right? So, I mean, we've moved to subscription models, which make billing more consistent and over time. We're also seeing the emergence of capacity-based models. And, you know, there was a time not too long in the past where there were products and tools that we make at Autodesk that very few firms, unless you were a massive firm, could actually afford. You know, you would only use those tools if you were a certain size. That doesn't actually make sense in a capacity-based world. So if you are paying for capacity, if I'm a small firm and I need to run, say, 3 structural simulations a week, if I pay per structural simulation and don't have to pay an enormous amount of money for the software up front, then it doesn't matter that I'm a small firm versus a big firm. So I think we're seeing these more flexible models that, of course, they relate to the cloud, they relate to those sort of things. And I think there's an interesting difference between large firms and small firms. I think large firms have an inertia that they have to overcome, but they also have they have the capital, they have the assets, they have the money, they have the ability to do some of these things early. So the firms, like what Heather was saying, firms that have been doing this for a while actually have a massive advantage because they are able to act on it. On the flip side, the small firms are nimble, right? They're flexible, they're starting out. In fact, their secret sauce will be adopting these very kinds of technologies that we're talking about right now. Data in the cloud, work from anywhere, flexible learning, bring the data together, use generative design, use digital twins, use insights, use these things. Those will be the folks that will win. But I do believe in these sort of flexible business models that allow everybody to leverage all of the technology.
Okay, great. So I'm going to ask the final question for each of you, and then we may have time for a couple questions, Kevin. Jose, I want to start out with you. I know you have to log off just a couple minutes before the rest of us. So the big final question is, what does the firm of 2040 look like? You know, if you put on your thinking cap, your wizardry, whatever you want to call it, your crystal ball, what does the firm of 2040 look like, Jose?
He might be gone.
Oops, did we already lose him? Okay, well, sorry about that. I thought we were gonna have him for another 5 minutes, but so let's just go ahead and throw that one over to Heather.
Sure, so I think that we're going to see very few of the traditional A&Es in place. I think that line between technology and design, it's already been blurred. I think it will become increasingly blurred. Some examples, we all know about Sidewalk Labs and their smart city project in Toronto. And, you know, yes, I know it's, you know, that project has been terminated, but they're going to come back in a different city with a different model, with more privacy controls and all the rest. We've seen it with Elon Musk's The Boring Company and Hyperloop. Pretty much with no past performance, they've won large scale tunneling projects. You see it with tech companies, with autonomous vehicles. Just what was it, 2 weeks ago with space. SpaceX just launched American's first private company to do so here in America. So that line is really becoming increasingly blurred. So it's really going to result in the increase in the skill set of firms. So tech companies, I think, are going to start acquiring more traditional skill sets, maybe by buying some of these more traditional A&E companies, especially as the owners age out. And traditional companies are going to be acquiring the tech skill sets, maybe not as much through acquisition, but through training, by hiring different people. It's funny, Chris, I love your term of co-opetition. I have a colleague at Jacobs who refers to it as competimates. These are where sometimes you compete and sometimes you collaborate together. Taking what Chris said earlier a little bit further, I always try to remember that today's competitor could be tomorrow's client, because this is such a small industry. We all have competitors who have since become clients. But with these competimates, co-opetition, it's really about collaborating together to address these new market opportunities, because alone, we're probably not going to be able to get there. So it comes back to your behavior, your culture, as we talked about earlier, your mindset, not being risk averse, being open to new ideas. And if you want to endure, do not get too comfortable in your silo.
Great. Looks like we have Jose back. Jose, I wanted to ask you before you have to jump off, what does the firm of 2040 look like?
Whoa, that's kind of like a very interesting question. I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball to actually explain all that, but I think in my mind, if I had to summarize what I see the firm as 2040 is like having a very different demographics in terms of like the roles that we have and have been there for probably 30, 40 years. I'm very doubtful they're going to be here. I expect to have like the projects that we have right now, many different type of like professions in there, and professions that didn't exist as of today, right? I expect us probably, hopefully to be, again, probably much more remote, but also with some sort of physical presence, because in the end, physical presence or local presence, because in the end, I think that the work that we do is not all in the built environment, is an enabler for many of the things. And we need to listen locally to be able to deliver globally, right? So that's something that also I think the firm needs to have. And I hopefully like by 2040, as just like in a few years time, much more years time, infrastructure and the broader engineering space is being seen as a critical part of how people, how you enable how people live, work, and play in a more thick way. So hopefully we will see engineering to be playing even a more integral part in people's lives than it even playing today. So maybe I'm being too optimistic, I'm being too fatalistic about that, but those are the things that I would personally see. I see all this revolution that's happening is also like almost like an opportunity to put the engineers back at the center of so many different things that we can do to improve our society going forward. So again, maybe I'm a little bit of like an optimistic, maybe I'm just like a little bit realistic, but those are some of the things that I would expect to see in the firm at 2040, like diversity from backgrounds, diversity in terms of like different elements, being much more at the core of how we work, play, and live. And those are some of the traits that I expect.
Great, thanks, Jose. Mike, what about you? And then we're gonna go to Chris.
So I sense we're a group of optimists here. So I'm an optimist as well. For me, a lot of it comes back to the co-opetition thing that Heather and Chris have both talked about, but looking at it at a knowledge level, I think there's an enormous amount of knowledge that exists across the engineering, architecture, the entire building industry that is mostly common, but is not always shared, or is rarely shared. And I think by 2040, I see there being a strata of knowledge, be it digitally represented, hopefully, that is available to everyone. Again, I use the term, raising the sea, raising all boats, right? All boats are naturally floating at a higher level, which allows the competition then to actually happen at a higher level. The difference between firms is no longer at this lower level, that everybody is benefiting from the shared observations. Perhaps it's the performance of certain buildings, or performance of certain decisions, or materials, or processes, or whatever it is. So I really do see a more collaborative world centered around knowledge sharing.
So I have the honor of being a fat. Yes, that's always the good in the part. So for me, one of the first things I do whenever I ask a question like that, Joe, is I go 20 years back. So we go back to year 2000 and think, where were we as a practice, as a world? We were all freaking out because we thought our computers were going to blow up. right? And, you know, the world was I would argue, a very, very different place 20 years ago. So I'll then go forward and think 20 years, what's the context going to be of the firm 20 years from now? And so we will have massive water stress globally. We're already seeing that in the United States, North America. So we will see mass migration. We're going to have political stress due to migration, which we have not in our lifetimes yet even begun to experience. And so therefore, we're going to be called upon to solve problems which are not just technical, but have a social dimension in a way which is quite profound. And I'm not quite sure if we're going to be up for that yet. Right now, the firms aren't, but I think by then we will be. I think by 2040, we are always going to be designing in full artificial reality. And we'll be using virtual reality in construction sites as an absolute norm. It's going to be like, duh, can you believe that we actually did this once without it? Just in the same way now, we can hardly imagine using a slide rule, which I think I was the last class at Cornell to actually use, you know. And I think, and so this is going to be a new, so which means then, if you're doing in VR, AR, that means you don't have to be co-located in any way, shape, or form. So all of us could be in a design meeting right now and actually really interact in it with haptics. So we can push and pull and really feel that. I think by 2040, we will have climate legislation, which has been a long time coming, which will then have a different paradigm shift on how and what we design to. So the makeup of our firms will also be very different in what's going to be needed in order for us to design for things which will be fit for purpose, because the purpose will be not just engineering specification. And I think that's so. And then if I think about economically, we will have gone through 2 recessions. We're about to hit 1, and we will at least go through another 2 within 20 years. And I think we'll go through 2 identity crises as a profession. We're kind of in one right now, wondering what's our role. I think we'll go through a couple more as these new tools and these new challenges come. And so, and the last one I'll say, you know, politically, there will be a new ball game. There'll be a new empire. Not quite sure which one will rise stronger, but you know, our rocket is kind of hitting over. We've seen peak America. And so then the question becomes, what will it look like in this new environment for consultants? We already have a lack of sand. We have a lack of, you know, so it's going to be very interesting. It's how we design in a constrained, physically constrained world. So these are going to be new challenges, which I think super exciting for us. And we have to walk into this with our head up, right? Not looking backwards, but to walk with that, with our head up and shoulders back, saying, okay, it's a new game. It's a new quarter. Let's get the team out there and let's play ball.
Great, Chris. Thanks for closing us out there. Daphne, I'm going to throw it back to you for a few final comments.
I thought they had unmuted me. Sorry about that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to our panelists for all your wonderful insights, to our donors for making this session possible. We do have a short evaluation that we will send you this afternoon, so please share your experience with us. And be sure to join us next week for our second session, The Buildings We Live and Work In. That'll be on June 25th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, have a great afternoon, and please stay safe.